Tishani Doshi is one of the rising stars of contemporary Indian poetry in English. She was born in Madras in 1975 to a Welsh mother and a Gujarati father. She was educated in the United States, but she has now settled in Madras, which is now known as Chennai. Besides being a poet, she is a fiction writer, a dancer, and a choreographer as well. She has won numerous awards, including the All India Poetry Prize and the Forward Prize. She was elected Fellow of the Royal Society of Literature. Among her important poetry collections are Countries of the Body and Everything Begins Elsewhere. Let us try to take a close look at the title of the poem, The Immigrant's Song. Who is an immigrant? An immigrant is a person who moves from one place to another and lives permanently in the second place. The second place usually being in another country. Migration is a very, very old phenomenon. Migration, human migration, is almost as old as human history. It is said that somewhere around 100,000 years ago, humans migrated from Africa to the various parts of the globe. And there are fossils which evidence this, or at least which suggest this. This poem is the song of an immigrant. Please look at the positioning of the inverted comma, of the apostrophe. Immigrant apostrophe ssong. So it is the song of one immigrant. It is not a group song. It is not as if all the immigrants are standing on the stage and singing this song. It is the song of an immigrant, of one immigrant. He might be archetypal. He might represent the entire immigrant community, but still it is the song sung by that one individual. The immigrant song. Why has the poet used the word song rather than the word poem? Song is a set of words which can be set to music. Song is a poem which can be sung. This present poem is hardly musical. I don't think it's musical at all. It's a free verse poem. I don't think it can be set to music, of course. With great difficulty, you can do that. But there is nothing musical about this poem. So, strictly speaking, the poet should have titled this poem The Immigrant's Poem. But the poet has chosen to title the poem The Immigrant's Song. Why? Because the song enjoys an immediacy, a power which the poem does not. The song comes from the heart. The song is part of the self of the speaker, part of the identity of the speaker. The song has the capacity to overwhelm a person's mind, a person's soul, a person's body to an extent the poem is not able to, or a poem is not able to. So the poet has very carefully titled this poem The Immigrant's Song. This song comes from the heart, the immigrant. The song comes from the depths of the being of the immigrant. What kind of immigrants does this poet have in mind? This poem speaks of coffee growing. So I think we can surmise that, conclude that the immigrants are from some coffee growing country. This particular immigrant is from some growing country. It could be Brazil, it could be Vietnam, it could be Indonesia, it could be Colombia. These are the top coffee growing countries of the world. And something very interesting, the culture of wearing bandanas is found in all these countries. The poem refers to scarves, women wearing headscarves, bandanas, and very interestingly, the women of all these countries, Brazil, Vietnam, Indonesia, Colombia, wear bandanas. So they have migrated from these countries, one of these countries, or maybe many of these countries, several of these countries. And where have they gone to? Where are they now? Obviously, it's the West. They are in the UK, or in the USA, or in Canada, or in Australia, or in New Zealand, or in Europe. So this poem is about an immigrant from one of these countries moving to a Western country. I think I don't have to labor much to explain the nuances of the process of migration, because immigration is something widespread in Kerala today. Kerala is like Europe. In Europe, when a boy or a girl becomes 18 years old, he leaves or she leaves the house. In Kerala, we go a step further. We are more European than the Europeans themselves. In Kerala, when a boy or a girl becomes 18 years old, she leaves Kerala or he leaves Kerala. That's in a lighter vein. I would like to point out that though I said that human migration is as old as human history, it is only in the second half of the 20th century, the last decades, the closing decades of the 20th century, that migration became so widespread, so universal, and this has gathered momentum in the opening decades of the 21st century. Now you find migration from almost every country in the world which is not economically very developed, migration from such a country to Western countries. Let us stay here and wait for the future to arrive, for grandchildren to speak in folk tongues about the country we once came from. The speaker says, let us stay here. The immigrants have come to the new country and they have decided that their future is in the new country. Let us stay here and wait for the future. See the contrast. The past becomes insignificant. The past becomes immaterial. The past becomes totally unimportant. What is important is the present and the future. Wait for the future to arrive. At one point, the future will become the present. The future will become the present, and the future will arrive. For grandchildren to speak in folk tongues about the country we once came from. The fact is that, however much we decide to forget our past, the past has a habit of catching up with us. The speaker says at one point the future will arrive. The immigrants have forgotten their past, they're obsessed with the present, they're obsessed with the future, but at one point the future will arrive. The future will become the present. And the grandchildren of the immigrants are curious to know where the families have come from. For grandchildren to speak in folk tongues, this is a slightly difficult construction. In the Bible, the devil appears, Satan appears in the guise of a serpent, in the form of a serpent, and the serpent is said to have a forked tongue. To have a forked tongue means to speak deceitfully, to speak untruthfully, to say something and mean something else. But what exactly does forked tongue mean here? I'm not very sure, to be frank. To speak in forked tongues, it could mean that the grandchildren are not really interested to know about the past. They just want to entertain their grandparents. And so, in order to strike up a conversation with their grandparents, in order to initiate a conversation with the grandparents, they ask about the past. Or it could mean that the grandchildren speak the language of the new country, but not wholly so. Some elements of their native tongues are present in their idiolects. You know what's an idiolect? An idiolect is the language peculiar to an individual, like dialect, language peculiar to a region, register, language peculiar to a class. Register is the language of a particular class. Dialect is the language of a particular region. Idiolect is the language of a particular individual. The grandchildren speak the language of the new country, but with elements of their native tongues in their idiolect. And so they can say, it can be said that they speak in folk tongues. So the grandchildren speak in folk tongues for about the country we once came from, the country which is the country of the origin of the immigrant has completely disappeared from the life of the immigrant, from the memory of the immigrant, until the immigrant becomes a grandparent, becomes a grandfather or a grandmother, and is involved in a conversation with his grandchild, his grandson or his granddaughter, and the grandfather or the grandmother, the immigrant, is constrained to speak about the country he came from. Tell us about it, they might ask, and you might consider telling them of the sky and the coffee beans, the small white houses and dusty streets. This is a passage that demands some examination. The grandchildren ask the grandparents about their home country. Tell us about it, they might ask. What is the response of the grandparents? And you might consider telling them of the sky and the coffee beans. The poet does not say that you will explain in detail about your home country. The poet does not say you might tell them of the sky and the coffee beans, but the poet says, and you might consider telling them. You are not sure whether you are going to tell them or not. You don't know whether you're going to tell them or not. You might consider telling them. What does this show? I think the interpretation is that even now there is a powerful disconnect between the immigrants and their home country. And they are not very happy to speak about it. And even after all these long years, all these long decades, the immigrants do not want to speak about their home country. And even when their grandchildren question them about their home country, they are rather reluctant to speak about it. And you might consider, you're not sure whether you're going to do it, you might consider telling them of the sky and the coffee beans. Because the sky is very different. The sky in the UK, for example, is very different from the sky in India. Asian countries, South American countries have bright skies, bright blue skies. And you might consider telling them of the sky and the coffee beans. Coffee does not grow in most Western countries, in Europe, in the UK. The small white houses and the dusty streets. The immigrants come from countries which are not as developed as the West. And the houses are small and white. The streets are dusty. The main point is that the immigrants are not too eager to speak of their native lands, even after the passage of so many years and so many decades. You might set your memory afloat like a paper boat down a river. You might pray that the paper whispers your story to the water, that the water sings it to the trees, that the trees howl and howl it to the leaves. If you keep still and do not speak, you might hear your whole life fill the world until the wind is the only word. We now come to the very last part of the poem where we meet with a sudden and unexpected twist in the thematic trajectory of the poem. You might set your memory afloat like a paper boat down a river. You must remember that this is said about the immigrant who is reluctant to speak about his own experiences, his own memories, his own life, even in the presence of his grandchildren, even when he is questioned about these things by his grandchildren. It is such a man who, of whom it is said, you might set your memory afloat like a paper boat down a river. What does this mean? I think the best interpretation would be to see the concluding lines of the poem as alluding to the vast and powerful body of immigrant literature. You might set your memory afloat like a paper boat down a river. The river stands for time. The paper boat stands for the literary work. What is a book after all? But a number of leaves, paper leaves, bound together. You might set your memory afloat like a paper boat down a river. You might transform your memories into a work of literature which travels down the river of time. You might pray that the paper whispers your story to the water, and the water sings it to the trees, and the trees howl and howl it to the leaves. You must remember, I repeat, that this is about a person reluctant to speak about his experiences, his memories, his life, even to his grandchildren. And such a person puts together his experiences, his memories, his life into a work of literature. And the work of literature proclaims his life, proclaims his experiences, proclaims his memories to the world. And the world becomes overwhelmed by it. You might pray that the paper whispers your story to the water. That is what every writer does. The writer writes the book maybe for his personal satisfaction. But once it is published, he wants the publication of the book to have an impact on the world. You might pray that the paper whispers your story to the water, and the water sings it to the trees, and the trees howl and howl it to the leaves. If you keep still and do not speak, you refuse to speak. You refuse to say anything except through your work of literature. If you keep still and do not speak except through your work of literature, except through your book, you might hear your whole life fill the world until the wind is the only word. You might find that your life has overwhelmed the world. Overwhelmed the world. That precisely is what has happened in the case of the books of many of the immigrants. That precisely is what has happened to the writings of immigrant writers, the experiences, the memories, the life of the immigrants, which they were reluctant to share even to their grandchildren, even to those who were near them, even to those who were dear to them. Those experiences, those memories, those lives have now filled the world, have now overwhelmed the world. Let us take one more look at the opening lines of the last section of the poem. You might set your memory afloat like a paper boat down a river. A paper boat is always in a precarious situation. It can sink at any moment. In fact, it is gradually getting wet and gradually sinking into the water. We can interpret these lines to mean that the memories of the immigrants are fragile, are precarious, are always moving towards extinction, are always moving towards the point of sinking into the river of time. I think that we can come up with one more reading of the very last part of the poem, the very last lines of the poem. If you keep still and do not speak, you might hear your whole life fill the world until the wind is the only word. This could be an allusion to the state of the contemporary world. Immigration is as old as Homo sapiens, but today it has become very common, very widespread, very universal, very enormous, very systematic. And the time is not distant when the song of the immigrant will overwhelm the world. The voice of the immigrant will overwhelm the world, and the world will be filled with the song which describes the experiences of the immigrant. Your whole life fill the world until the wind is the only word. The wind will start speaking about the life of the immigrant, because the time is not distant when the world will become the world of immigrants. The most common, the most universal, the most enormous, the most systematic phenomenon will be immigration. It would be profitable to bring into conjunction the present poem, Immigrant Song, with the essay of Tishani Doshi titled Journey to the End of the Earth. The present poem is about one person going from one country to another, or rather, about the phenomenon of immigration. Travelogue, Journey to the End of the Earth, is about one person going to Antarctica. Tishani Doshi wrote the essay after going to Antarctica in order to share her experiences. In the poem, one person goes from one country to another country. In the essay, one person crosses 9 time zones, 6 checkpoints, and goes to the place which appears to her to be the end of the earth. Let us take a look at the stylistics of the poem. I use stylistics in a very general way here, not in a very technical sense. The title of the poem is The Immigrant Song. But how far is it a song? We have already discussed it. It's a song because of the strength of emotion behind it. It's a song because of its powerful appeal to the heart. It is a song because of its immediacy, its intimacy. But that's all. In a technical sense, it's a free verse poem, not a poem in traditional verse. Most of the features of traditional verse are absent from the poem. So, it can be said that it is not a song. The Immigrant Song is not a song in a technical sense. The musical element in it, if at all it is present, is very weak. I don't know whether it can be set to music, but the performers of today are capable of setting even the most prosaic piece to music. This poem is titled Song, but it's actually a free verse poem. It's a good example of vers libre. When I was a schoolboy, I was happily pronouncing this term as vers libre. There is no harm in doing so. But I think that the better way of pronouncing the term, the more French way of pronouncing the term, is vers libre. This is a free verse poem because it refuses to make use of traditional meters. There is no proper rhyme scheme. There is no regular stanzaic pattern. The diction is not what would support a traditional poem, but rather what would support a free verse poem. The diction is not self-consciously poetic. Instead, it is unself-consciously ordinary. The words chosen by the poet are all common, everyday, ordinary. The idea seems to be to bring the poem as close to everyday life, everyday conversation as possible. The tone is extremely conversational. There is nothing self consciously poetic or musical in the poem. And this is largely because of the careful selection of ordinary words made by the poet. An interesting feature used by Tishani Doshi in this poem is italicization. Take a look at the 14th line Let me check it. I'm not very sure. I think it's the 14th line. Yes, it is. The 14th line of the poem, which consists of only one word, disappeared, and the word is italicized. I shall read the 13th and the 14th lines together. Let us not say the word disappeared. Italics is the font in which letters slant from left to right, and the letters are not written in a thick typeface. Italics is the font which is used usually in prose to emphasize something, to draw attention to something. When you want to draw attention to something, you put it in italics. But here the word disappeared is put in italics. Let us not say the word disappeared. You can also use italics to indicate that the word is shouted, the word is yelled, or the word is uttered under one's breath. The word is spoken in undertones. I think that in this poem, the word disappeared is put in italics because the word is not spoken clearly and loudly, but uttered under one's breath, but uttered, spoken in undertones. Let us not say the word disappeared, because the word disappeared is an unspeakable word in this context. It's a very painful word. It is something which is horrifying, something beyond our imagination. Nobody wants to talk of it. Nobody wants to think of it. And in order to convey this, the poet puts the word disappeared in italics. Let us not say the word disappeared. Some 18 lines down, the grandchildren ask the immigrants about the country they once came from, and the demand of the grandchildren is put in italics. I shall read the lines there. For grandchildren to speak in folk tongues about the country we once came from. Tell us about it, they might ask. Tell us about it is put in italics. Again, why has the poet taken this decision to italicize the four words? Tell us about it. One, she wants to emphasize the words, she wants to draw the attention of the reader to the words. Two, more importantly, she wants to convey the interest, the eagerness, the enthusiasm of the grandchildren. Tell us about it. The grandchildren are very eager to know about the native land of the immigrants, of their grandparents. And in order to convey to the reader the eagerness, the interest, the enthusiasm, the urgency, the poet puts the four words, tell us about it, tell us about it, in italics. There is not much manipulation of linear length in this poem. In fact, most of the lines in this poem are of more or less the same length. The poet does not make use of the device of moving from a very long line to a very short line or vice versa. Similarly, the poet does not capitalize the opening letters of the lines. Some free verse poets decide to capitalize the opening letters or the opening words of the lines. But in this poem, the poet has not taken such a decision. Only those letters which require capitalization as a result of a fresh beginning being made at that point in the trajectory of the poem by the poet are capitalized. The imagery is powerful and striking. The most important images are those drawn from nature. In fact, much of the strength of the poem comes from its nature imagery. Coffee beans, sky, baobabs, birds, the smell of rain, the first smell of rain, river, water, trees, leaves, wind. There is building imagery, houses, streets, gates, bridges, churches. There is the imagery of the human body, the long arms of the sky. I would like to say something about the opening of the poem. The poem has a rather abrupt opening. In medias res, in the midst of things, we are not provided with any kind of introduction to the thematic trajectory of the poem. Instead, we are placed in the middle of the narrative. Let us not speak of those days when coffee beans filled the morning with hope. The speaker is already in the new country. The immigration has already taken place. Thus, the opening of the poem is in medias res, in the midst of things. The poet makes use of some very striking similes. A simile is a figure of speech in which two things are brought into comparison with each other, and the comparison is explicit. Look at this simile early in the poem. I think it is line 3, line 4. When our mothers' headscarves hung like white flags on washing lines. Hung like white flags on washing lines. Some lines down, we come across the following simile. Let us not name our old friends who are unraveling like fairy tales in the forests of the dead. Who are unraveling like fairy tales in the forests of the dead. Further down, somewhat near the closure of the poem, we come across these lines. You might set your memory afloat like a paper boat down a river. Like a paper boat down a river. Hyperbole is the figure of speech in which the writer overstates what he wants to say. It is a case of exaggeration. Everyone knows, everyone, including the writer, including the poet, knows that what is said is not true in a literal sense, but it is said for the sake of effect. The present poem concludes with a powerful hyperbole. If you keep still and do not speak, you might hear your whole life, fill the world until the wind is the only word. The poet makes effective use of personification, anthropomorphism early in the poem. I think it is in line 5 and line 6. Let us not speak of the long arms of sky that used to cradle us at dusk. The sky is presented as possessing long arms. Usually, only human beings possess arms. Here, the sky possesses arms, not just arms, but long arms that used to cradle us at dusk. Further, the sky used to cradle us at dusk with its long arms. We find human characteristics attributed to the sky. We also find the sky behaving like human beings, even like mothers, cradling us at dusk with its long arms. A clear and striking case of personification and anthropomorphism. Metonymy, synecdoche are all figures of speech in which one thing stands for the other. In metonymy, one thing stands for the other. When that one thing that stands for the other is part of the other, it becomes synecdoche, the part standing for the whole. We find metonymy, we find synecdoche in the present poem. And when we break bread in cafes and at kitchen tables with our new brothers, and when we break bread, bread stands not merely for bread, but for food in general. And when we break bread, when we have our food, bread is just one kind of food. But here, bread stands for all kinds of food. In cafes and at kitchen tables with our new brothers. In cafes and at kitchen tables with our new brothers. Brothers, they are the citizens of the new country. They are not actually brothers, but they are the citizens of the new country who are accepted as equivalent to brothers by the speaker. Alliteration is the figure of speech in which consonantal sounds are repeated. Assonance is the figure of speech in which vowel sounds are repeated. Anaphora is the repetition of words and phrases for creating a special impact. The opening lines of the poem make powerful use of alliteration, assonance, and anaphora. For example, the words let us not are repeated again and again. Let us not speak. Let us not speak again. Let us not speak of those days when coffee beans. Let us not speak of the long arms of sky that used to cradle us at dusk. Let us not speak of men stolen. Let us not say the word disappeared. Let us not remember the first smell of rain. The use of alliteration, assonance, and anaphora creates an incantatory effect and captures the undivided attention of the reader. It is as if the poet is chanting a magic spell. I am reminded of the famous chant of the witches in Macbeth, Act 4, Scene 1, which contains the refrain double, double toil and trouble, fire, burn, and cauldron bubble. Unquote. Understatement is a figure of speech in which something is stated with less seriousness than it deserves. Understatement is a case of deliberate downplay. Understatement means that something which is quite important is stated casually, as if it were not important at all. The poet makes use of understatement more than once in the poem. For example, in the lines, let us not speak of men stolen from their beds at night. Let us not speak of men stolen from their beds at night. The poet speaks of this as if it is a case of petty theft. A thief steals something at night. A small theft has taken place. But the fact is that what is being stolen is men. Let us not speak of men stolen from their beds at night. It's a case not of petty theft, but of kidnapping, but of abduction, and quite probably murder. Similarly, look at these lines. Let us not name our old friends who are unraveling like fairy tales in the forests of the dead. The poet says this very casually. Let us not name our old friends. What is happening to the friends? They are unraveling like fairy tales in the forests of the dead. The friends are being murdered in large numbers. The number of friends being murdered is so large as that so large that an entire forest can be created. Just as there are numerous trees in the forest, this is the forest of the dead. The forest consisting of numerous dead bodies. Classic case of downplay, of understatement. One of the reasons why the Immigrant song is such a successful poem is that there is a tension present throughout the poem. Tension between the previous life of the speaker and the speaker's current life. Tension between the past and the present. Tension between the previous identity of the speaker and the current identity of the speaker. Tension between the native land of the speaker and the new country of the speaker. It is this tension that provides the poem with much of its strength. We can wrap up the discussion by asking the question, why is the Immigrant song so successful? The Immigrant song is written by Tishani Doshi. Tishani Doshi was born in Chennai, then known as Madras. But she is not Tamil. That makes her an immigrant in Chennai, that was Madras. Her father is Gujarati. That makes her, as I said, an immigrant in Tamil Nadu, in Chennai, in Madras. Her mother is Welsh. That makes her an immigrant in India. She was educated not in India, not in Wales, but in the United States. Thus, we have a poet who is an immigrant in Madras, who is an immigrant in Gujarat, certainly, who is an immigrant in India, who is an immigrant in Wales, and most certainly an immigrant in the United States. The Immigrant song is so successful because it is written by a quintessential immigrant. Not just written by a quintessential immigrant, but written by a quintessential immigrant, not in ink, but in her heart's blood.